welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous. You're joining us live from New York City, where a week of diplomacy at the highest level is wrapping up. Of course, we have seen drama and speeches from some of the highest leaders in world politics. And now, today, to discuss everything and his new book, joining us is Jonathan Harounoff. He is the Israeli spokesperson for the United Nations. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you. You have just released your new book, Unveiled, Inside Iran's Women's Life Freedom Revolt. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But of course, what we need to talk about is, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu just took behind that podium and spoke to an empty audience at the United Nations here, General Assembly, a mass walkout of over 100 diplomats. Can I just get your response to that?
Good morning, Tom. Great to be with you. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke on Friday to a hall that did have some diplomats inside, but he most importantly spoke to the world. And the mass walkout that you saw, we caught wind of plans to have this scheme the night before. This was something that was orchestrated. It's the very antithesis of diplomacy, people who aren't willing to listen to the other side. And you never saw any of these mass walkouts when the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran was speaking, Turkey, other countries with very problematic humanitarian records. But this was very much an orchestrated walkout to try and muzzle the Prime Minister's voice and the voice of Israel, but that clearly didn't work. Instead, the Prime Minister spent 45 minutes laying out Israel's strategic successes and its objectives for the continuation of the war, and made it abundantly clear that the war could be over as soon as the hostages are returned home and as soon as Hamas is dismantled and no longer poses a threat.
Yes, and Jonathan, of course, the war in Gaza has been a focal point and has been mentioned behind that podium many times during this week, of course, by many leaders. Some would say that Israel is beginning to look more isolated on the world stage. What are your thoughts that came that some world leaders, some at the highest level, are calling what Israel is doing in the enclave a genocide?
I think it's a preposterous claim to be making, because no country, government committing genocide would also at the same time be delivering critical aid and also be providing advanced warnings and also be making it abundantly clear that any kind of conflict they have is not with the people inhabiting that piece of land, but the government, the terrorizing government that's terrorizing both the people of Israel and the people of Gaza. But it's a preposterous claim to make that Israel has time and again refuted.
Of course, and we've seen at the start of this week multiple Israeli allies, including the United Kingdom, that of Canada as well, among others, recognize a Palestinian state. What are your thoughts on that? And of course, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke strongly against it, called it a reward for terrorism. The same goes for Donald Trump. He labelled it the same. What is your response to these allies recognising Palestine?
At the beginning of High Level Week, especially on Monday, you saw a two-state solution conference convened by France, where many of these nations were making these declarations, proclamations, patting each other on the back for making these statements of statehood. But the reality on the ground hasn't changed at all. And if anything, the only thing it's created is not just a reward for Hamas terrorism, but also, unfortunately, an incentive for them to try and carry out more of these things, because they know that if they, when a Hamas terrorist leader is saying that there's a direct correlation between what happened on October the 7th and these declarations of Palestinian statehood on Turtle Bay in Manhattan, that's only going to encourage them and embolden them much more. This doesn't lead to future peace, it just creates many more obstacles. These declarations of statehood don't do anything to alleviate the suffering of hostages, they don't do anything to help further dismantle Hamas. And if you saw in the messaging of many of these countries that were also declaring Palestinian statehood, they were also sort of alluding to the fact that they support a Hamas-free Gaza, What they don't talk about at all is how they would actually bring about a Hamas-free Gaza. It was these were very surface level declarations, and I think the implication here is that Israel would be the only country that would actually have to dismantle and remove Hamas, which is what we're doing. But trying to go from one extreme to the other end of already talking about statehood when you haven't dealt with any of the issues in between is just premature, and it's very unproductive. And it ended up just being theatrical without actually having much substance.
Yes, Jonathan, and if we look at the other Palestinian territory, of course, we've got the West Bank. There has been numerous and multiple amount of scrutiny coming out from the international community, especially sounding alarms about these new E1 settlement plans that have been announced by Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich. Following President Mahmoud Abbas's remote speech that happened, Donald Trump said that he would not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. Are Palestinians warranted in their fears of annexation by Israel?
Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump are meeting today at the White House, where they're going to be discussing a whole range of issues, and I'm sure that topic will come up as well. But I think when it comes to not just Gaza, but other parts of the region, I think what gets lost in conversation is something that President Macron also alluded to. He said, and I quote, that there's no Hamas in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, however you would call it, and the reality is very different. And today there's actually going to be a Security Council session at the United Nations where all of the countries are going to be echoing the same thing, and Israel is going to be presenting a very different case, a case where it's actually highlighting and demonstrating a very, very clear evidence of Hamas existing, not just in Gaza but in other parts controlled, whether it's by Hamas or by the PA, and we'll take it from there.
Yes, indeed, Jonathan. Let's move now on to Iran. Of course, it was alluded to in Benjamin Netanyahu's speech that once again Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Of course, this follows strikes from the United States back in July, and of course there has been calls internationally, the fact that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. However, Benjamin Netanyahu has sounded the alarm. Can I get your thoughts and your analysis of the current information that we have and the current status when it comes to the possibility of Iran having a nuclear weapon, now that it has these ongoing negotiations with the IAEA remain murky?
The Islamic Republic of Iran has been quite unambiguous in its desire to annihilate the state of Israel and to cause tremendous damage to the United States and the West. And when you have a country the size of Iran and a country which is 80 times the size of the state of Israel, you cannot afford to respond to a nuclear attack. But at that point it would be existential, which is why Israel launched its preemptive attack strikes in June, and followed by the United States, because both countries saw that the Islamic Republic was not doing what it was claiming to be doing when it was in the diplomatic realm, saying that it doesn't have nuclear ambitions. We saw quite the opposite, that it was amassing a massive arsenal of ballistic missiles where you could put nuclear warheads on it. It was developing nuclear programs. It was essentially devising this extermination plan for the state of Israel, and Israel had to respond. And we don't usually say that positive news comes out of the United Nations, but positive news did come out of the United Nations last week when when you saw the reimposition of sanctions on the Islamic Republic, because countries in Europe as well, the E3, came to the, I think, realization that the Islamic Republic does have nefarious goals and ambitions, and that threat extends well beyond the small borders of the State of Israel. It threatens Europe, it threatens the United States, and so long as you have a regime hell-bent on destruction and not peace, like the Islamic Republic, which also goes against all of the interests and desires of the people inside Iran, who are seeing tremendous domestic issues that aren't being addressed, the United Nations Security Council had no choice but to act.
Yes, Jonathan, now let's talk about what's going on inside of Iran. Of course, you've said that, and so has the Israeli government, that there is no problem with the people of Iran. You have written this book, Unveiled, Inside Iran's Woman, Life, Freedom, Revolt. Tell us a bit more about why you wanted to write it, the backstory behind it, and the stories that you've told.
I think there are many misconceptions about the country of Iran, about the people of Iran, that I, from a personal side, but also from a global perspective, I think are very important to share. Mainstream media channels, whenever you watch news items about Iran, you're almost always going to see items about Iran's nuclear program, negotiations around that. You're going to see news about the regime's very expensive and dangerous foreign policy, its proxy network that has at one point encircled Israel. What you don't see at all are news items about the people inside Iran, who these 90 million plus people are, what their aspirations are, what life is like for them, whether they're in alignment or in disagreement with the Islamic Republic. And my motivation spending 3 years on this book was to very much highlight the tremendous gulf that exists between the people of Iran and the Islamic Republic of Iran, and to focus on the series of protests and uprising that we've seen in the past 46 years, with a specific focus on this massive uprising that took place in 2022, September 2022, after the killing of a young Kurdish Iranian 22-year-old woman, Mahsa Amini, and focusing on the massive protests that followed, not just inside Iran, where it spread to almost all of Iran's 31 provinces, but sort of the global reaction that you saw to that uprising and what the ramifications are today.
Jonathan, of course, you've spoken to many of these people in Iran. How do they feel about the current regime and its movements on the international stage?
They are overwhelmingly unsatisfied, displeased to say the least, and very upset with the regime, because what they're seeing play out with the Islamic Republic's foreign policy has a very direct impact on their lives. When you have a government that is investing hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, and diverting resources outside of the country to arm and train and finance terror proxies abroad, that has a very detrimental impact on the people of Iran. While all of this is happening, you're seeing massive debilitating water, gas and electricity shortages inside Iran. You saw Iran's president Masoud Pezeshkian earlier this year state that Tehran, which is a megacity of 9-10 million people, the fact that it could run out of water within a matter of months. You're seeing dams, some of the largest dams inside Tehran and elsewhere, evaporating, running out of water. You're seeing one of the biggest lakes in the Middle East, once the biggest lake, Lake Urmia, almost vanishing at this point. You're seeing buildings, government buildings, have to shut off electricity and water for intermittent periods because they just can't keep the lights on, literally. You have all of that where people can't live, can't survive, but at the same time their government doesn't care about that. They're caring much more about exporting this terrorist ideology, and that, from my research and my findings and my interviews, found that, and I think it's a very human reaction, that when your government cares much more about the latter as opposed to the former, they're going to rise up. And you saw that right before the 12-day war that took place between Israel and Iran, or the Islamic Republic. There were massive truck driver protests that really didn't get much news coverage at all, but you saw thousands of truck drivers across Iran go on strike in protest of the government's lack of support for their basic livelihood. And had the 12-day war not broken out, that might have metamorphosized and become something much greater. But so long as Iran's serious domestic issues don't get addressed, the people are going to continue to rise.
Yes, and Jonathan, how, of course, as you said, Iran, a huge country, a country of 92 million people. How do you see the stability of that government moving forward, and of course the future of the Ayatollah regime?
I think it's currently quite vulnerable, because not only was it left vulnerable after the Operation Rising Lion by Israel and Operation Midnight Hammer by the United States, you're seeing a growing amount of unrest inside Iran because of all of the domestic issues that I mentioned. So it's in quite a precarious position. But unfortunately, what happens when the Islamic Republic is in a position of weakness and cannot necessarily respond militarily to outside forces is it takes it out on its own people. And that's why you've seen so much brutality, arrests, executions, disappearances. But it is quite vulnerable, and as it's seeing growing isolation following the reimposition of sanctions and these economic tools of pressure, it's under pressure for sure.
And how should the international community now act? I mean, we've just seen these snapback sanctions come in from the European countries. How do you want bodies like the United Nations, like Israel's allies, to act against or the state of Iran, but in order to minimize harm for the Iranian people?
Well, I think the best tool at the disposal of many of the member states of the United Nations is to use these pressure tools and to disassociate themselves from the Islamic Republic as a sort of gesture of solidarity and support with the people of Iran. I don't think there's talk or appetite at all for any kind of foreign intervention, boots on the ground kind of thing. But I think the people of Iran, who I've spoken to at least, don't want other countries propping up, supporting the Islamic Republic. They want the opposite to happen, so that they can sort of take control of their own destiny.
Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.